All right, so are you ready to dive into something kind of crazy?
Always.
Okay, good. Because today we're looking at mind control cults and like how easy it is to manipulate our brains.
Yeah, should be fun.
We've got this stack of sources, and we're going to be focusing on a Joe Rogan interview with Chase Hughes.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of him.
Yeah, he calls himself a neuroscientist with a lowercase n.
Interesting.
But he's worked in behavioral analysis interrogation techniques. He's even trained government agencies.
Wow, so he's got some serious credentials then.
Yeah, it seems like it. And the thing is, he's not just talking theory.
Oh, so he's actually done this stuff.
He says he has.
Yeah.
Yeah, like interacting with cult recruiters and even programming a fighter with an alter ego.
An alter ego. Like a split personality.
That's what he claims.
Wild. Okay, I'm definitely intrigued.
Me too. And remember you're saying you're interested in the power of suggestion?
Right, right.
Well, Hughes claims he actually cured his own epilepsy with methylene blue.
Methylene blue. Isn't that a fabric dye?
Yeah, like from the 1890s.
That's pretty out there. I mean,
Yeah.
how much can we really trust these anecdotal stories,
Yeah.
versus actual scientific studies?
I know, especially with all this biohacking stuff that we've been talking about.
Right, exactly. It makes you wonder.
But he's not the only one taking it. Apparently, Joe Rogan and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. take methylene blue every day, too.
Wow, seriously?
Yeah, and get this, RFK Jr. is the one who recommended it to both of them. He also suggested combining it with red light therapy.
So they're like biohacking buddies or something.
Seems like it. But let's get back to the cult stuff. How about that? Hughes talks about how these recruiters actually manipulate people.
Okay, yeah, that's what I'm really interested in.
Well, he describes this technique called elicitation. Have you ever heard of that?
Elicitation? Not really.
It's like this really subtle way of guiding a conversation.
So they're leading you without you even realizing it.
Exactly. Like they're triggering a specific response in your brain.
So it's almost like they're hacking into your subconscious.
Kinda, yeah. He says it's like activating a friend mode script that we all have.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So they're making you feel comfortable and open to suggestion.
That's the idea. It plays on our desire for connection, wanting to belong.
Yeah, we all want to be liked.
Right. And then once they've got you in that friend mode, Hughes says they start introducing these small deviations from your normal behavior.
Small deviations, like what?
Just little things at first.
Right.
Nothing too crazy, but gradually they pull you further and further away from your usual way of thinking.
So they're normalizing the extreme.
Exactly. It's a slow process, but it can be really effective. And this actually reminds me of something you mentioned about political movements using similar tactics.
Oh, yeah, you're right.
Hughes calls it identity hijacking.
Identity hijacking.
Yeah, like they frame their ideas in a way that aligns with your sense of self.
I see. So it's like, if you believe in this, then you must believe in us.
Exactly. And it works because we all want to feel like our beliefs are valid, right?
Absolutely.
So,
We
yeah.
want to be part of something bigger than ourselves.
And feel like we're on the right side.
Right. And Hughes keeps bringing up this idea of novelty and authority. Novelty and authority, how do those play into this?
He says they're super powerful when it comes to influencing behavior.
Okay, I can see that.
Like, remember the Milgram experiment?
The one with the electric shocks?
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, yeah, that was a crazy one. People were willing to shock someone else just because a guy in a lab coat told them to.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The novelty of the situation and the authority of the experimenter totally messed with their judgment.
It's kind of scary how easily we can be influenced.
Yeah, it really is. And this whole thing makes me think, have you ever, just gone along with something because an authority figure told you to?
Oh, totally.
Right.
We all have, right? It's like we're programmed to obey.
Right. And Hughes takes it even further. He says this stuff gets even more intense with PSYOPs,
PSYOP.
short for psychological operations.
Oh, wow. Like military stuff.
Yeah, he claims he's trained U.S. Army units in this, and now he says social media is like a major tool for manipulating public opinion.
Okay, now that's getting a little conspiracy theory-ish, isn't it?
Maybe. I mean, we're not saying we believe everything he says, but it's definitely interesting to think about.
True. And you've talked about being concerned about online echo chambers and all that.
Yeah, exactly.
So it kind of fits in with that.
Right. And Hughes argues that suppressing opposing voices and creating this fake sense of tribal consensus are like hallmarks of these PSYOPs campaigns.
So it's about controlling the narrative.
Yeah, and not necessarily through lies, but by exploiting our emotions and our tendency to conform.
So it's like a more subtle form of manipulation.
Exactly. And it makes you wonder, are we really in control of our own thoughts, or are we being nudged in certain directions without even realizing it?
That's a good question.
It's a little unsettling, right?
Yeah, a little bit. Like,
Yeah.
do we even know what we really believe anymore?
And Hughes ties this back to childhood, too. He talks about the childhood triangle of safety, friends, and rewards.
Oh, interesting. You mentioned you're into the whole childhood development thing.
Yeah, exactly.
So what does he say about that?
Well, he suggests that these early patterns of safety, friendship, and reward can make us more predictable as adults.
Oh, so our childhood baggage can actually make us more susceptible to manipulation.
That's his theory.
Wow, that's kind of deep.
It is. It makes you think about how much of our behavior is actually driven by our subconscious.
Right, and how much of that is rooted in our childhood experiences.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But then the question is, how do we break free from those patterns?
Right, if they're so deeply ingrained, how do we change them?
And Hughes has a name for that. He calls it the firewall illusion.
The firewall illusion.
Okay.
I like that.
It's the belief that we're immune to persuasion.
Oh, so we think we're too smart to be manipulated.
Exactly. But Hughes argues that social media algorithms are specifically designed to exploit our vulnerabilities, whether we realize it or not.
Okay, so it's like we're all playing this game online, but we don't even know the rules.
Right, and the algorithms are rigged against us.
So what can we do about it?
That's what we'll talk about next.
Yeah, it's like learning to spot the tricks so you don't get fooled. And, Hughes doesn't just talk about this stuff in theory. He actually claims to have used these techniques in some pretty wild ways.
Oh, really? Like what?
Well, he says he actually programmed a fighter with an alter ego.
Wait, he gave a professional fighter a split personality?
Yeah, that's what he says.
How is that even possible?
He doesn't really go into the specifics, but he mentions using hypnosis and simulated trauma to create this dissociative state.
Okay, but why would someone even want that?
Well, in this case, it was at the request of the boxer, Roy Jones Jr. Apparently, he wanted to eliminate fear, pain, and fatigue. Basically make himself a more efficient fighting machine.
So he's like a real-life Terminator.
Kinda.
That's insane. And a little scary, too.
It definitely raises some ethical questions.
Yeah.
Like, where do we draw the line between pushing boundaries and exploiting someone's vulnerability?
That's a good point, especially when you're talking about messing with someone's mind like that.
Right. And Hughes also mentions that Mike Tyson was hypnotized by his trainer Cus D'Amato from a really young age.
Oh, wow. Like, how young?
He says from the age of 13.
That's crazy. So Tyson was being hypnotized throughout his whole career.
At least during those early years.
And Hughes attributes Tyson's success to the hypnosis.
At least in part, yeah.
It makes you wonder how much of Tyson's fighting style was his own and how much was influenced by this hypnosis.
It's hard to say for sure, but it definitely shows the power of suggestion, especially when it starts at such a young age.
Right. And it brings up all these questions about the ethics of using these techniques.
Totally. Like, is it okay to manipulate someone's mind, even if it's for their own good?
That's a tough one. And speaking of tough questions, Hughes also talks about how these techniques are being used in the COVID-19 pandemic.
Oh, wow. So he's going there.
Yeah, he suggests that the media's response to the pandemic, the whole suppressing dissenting voices, focusing on fear and division, all that, it followed classic psyops tactics.
It's a pretty bold claim.
It is, but he brings up a specific op-ed from the Los Angeles Times that really caused a lot of controversy. Do you remember that one?
I think so. What was it about?
It was titled something like, "Mocking Anti-Vaxxers' COVID Deaths is Ghoulish. Yes, but maybe necessary."
Oh, yeah, I remember that one. It was pretty intense.
Yeah, and Hughes uses it as an example of how the media is trying to silence dissenting voices and create this artificial consensus around the pandemic.
So he's saying that anyone who questions a mainstream narrative is being labeled as an anti-vaxxer, and therefore it's okay to mock them.
Essentially, yeah. He sees it as a form of dehumanization, making it easier to dismiss people who hold different views.
That's pretty disturbing when you think about it. Like, we should be able to have open and honest conversations about these important issues without resorting to name-calling and ridicule.
Right. And Hughes actually claims he was a target of these psyops tactics himself.
Oh, really? How so?
Well, he got COVID and spoke publicly about his experience. But because he challenged the prevailing narrative and questioned certain measures, he was basically labeled as a threat.
So he was punished for thinking differently.
That's what he claims.
It's like we're not allowed to question anything anymore.
Right. And it makes you wonder how much of what we believe is actually our own opinion versus something that's been subtly shaped by outside forces.
Yeah, it's like, are we really thinking for ourselves, or are we just parrots repeating what we've been told?
And Hughes argues that one of the key indicators of a psyops campaign is the silencing of opposition.
So if an idea can't withstand scrutiny or debate, it's probably not a very good idea.
Exactly. He's saying that if you're not allowed to question something, it's probably because there's something to hide.
That makes sense. But it also paints a pretty bleak picture. Like, are we all just pawns in some giant propaganda game?
It can feel that way sometimes. But Hughes also offers some hope. He says that understanding these manipulation tactics is the first step to protecting ourselves.
So knowledge is power.
Right. He emphasizes recognizing what he calls the firewall illusion, which is the belief that we're somehow immune to these techniques.
Oh, yeah, we talked about that before.
Yeah.
Like, we think we're too smart to be fooled.
But Hughes argues that our brains are still wired to respond to these subtle cues, whether we realize it or not.
So we all have vulnerabilities.
Exactly. And understanding those vulnerabilities is the key to building resilience.
Okay, so how do we do that? How do we strengthen our mental firewall?
Well, Hughes talks about the importance of being aware of the four main elements that influence the mammalian brain:
Okay, what are those?
focus, authority, tribe, and emotion.
So those are the 4 levers that manipulators use to pull our strings.
Essentially, yeah. And by understanding how they work, we can start to recognize when they're being used against us.
Makes sense. So it's like learning to spot the red flags.
Right. And he also mentions 6 elements that are particularly influential for human brains:
6 more. Okay, what are those?
focus, openness, connection, suggestibility, compliance, and expectancy.
Wow, that's a lot to keep track of.
I know. But he argues that these elements are especially relevant to persuasion and influence.
So whether we're talking about marketing politics or even personal relationships, these are the things that make us tick.
Exactly. And once you know the tricks of the trade, you can start to see how they're being used all around you.
It's like those magic shows where once you know how the trick is done, it's not so impressive anymore.
Right. But if you don't know the trick, you're totally amazed.
And that's how they get you.
Exactly. But Hughes is all about exposing the tricks, you know? He wants us to be aware of how these techniques are being used so we can protect ourselves.
So it's not about becoming a hermit and disconnecting from the world. It's about learning to navigate it more effectively.
And that's where his insights into hypnosis become really interesting.
Okay, how so?
Well, he breaks down the formula for hypnosis, and it all comes down to 2 main things: enhanced focus and a series of micro-compliances.
So it's about getting someone's attention and then subtly leading them down a path where they become more open to your suggestion.
Exactly. And Hughes suggests that social media platforms use similar tactics, although much more subtly, to influence user behavior.
So it's like they're hypnotizing us without us even realizing it.
Kinda, yeah.
Yeah.
He points to the constant stream of notifications, likes, and comments as a form of micro-compliance.
Oh, yeah, I could see that. Like you get a notification and it's like a little reward that makes you want to keep scrolling.
Right. And all those likes and comments, they make you feel good, so you want to keep posting and engaging.
And in the process, we become more and more addicted to the platform.
Exactly. It's like they're training us to be more receptive to their suggestions without us even knowing it.
That's a little creepy when you think about it.
It is. But again, knowledge is power. By understanding these tactics, we can start to regain control over our online experience.
So it's about being mindful of how we're using social media and not letting it use us.
Exactly. And Hughes also talks about the use of fractionation in hypnosis.
Fractionation, what's that?
It's where the subject is repeatedly brought in and out of a trance state.
And that deepens the level of suggestibility.
Exactly. And Hughes suggests that social media algorithms use a similar approach.
How so?
Well, think about the way social media is designed. It's a constant roller coaster of emotional experiences, right?
Yeah.
You see something that makes you laugh, then something that makes you angry, then something that makes you sad.
Yeah, it's definitely a lot of ups and downs.
And Hughes argues that this constant emotional stimulation keeps us hooked and makes us more vulnerable to the platform's suggestions.
So it's like they're deliberately playing with our emotions to keep us engaged.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to be aware of how our emotions are being manipulated online. We need to be able to step back and detach from the drama.
Yeah, it's easy to get caught up in the outrage and the negativity.
Right. But we need to remember that it's all designed to keep us hooked. So instead of getting swept away by the tide, we need to learn to surf those waves.
I like that analogy.
Good.
It's about staying calm and collected, even when everyone around us is losing their minds.
Exactly. And Hughes also talks about advertising and propaganda and how these techniques have been used to shape public opinion for decades.
Oh yeah, like that whole Edward Bernays thing.
Right. He's the guy who's often called the father of public relations.
Yeah, wasn't he the one who convinced women to start smoking?
That's the one. He organized this Torches of Freedom march where women lit cigarettes as a symbol of their liberation.
Wow, that's crazy.
It is. And it shows how even seemingly positive social movements can be hijacked for commercial gain.
And how easy it is to manipulate people when you know how to push their buttons.
Exactly. And Hughes also talks about the effectiveness of advertising in general.
Like how they use emotional appeals and psychological cues to get us to buy stuff.
Right. And what's interesting is that even if we're aware of these tactics, our brains are still wired to respond to them.
So knowing the tricks doesn't make us immune.
Not entirely, no.
Yeah.
But it does give us a fighting chance. Awareness is the first step.
Okay, so what can we do to become more aware consumers?
Well, Hughes says it's about being more mindful both online and offline. Thinking critically about the messages we're bombarded with and making informed decisions based on our actual needs and values.
So not just buying into the hype.
Right. It's about reclaiming our autonomy and choosing to be conscious participants in the marketplace.
Instead of just being mindless consumers,
Exactly.
it sounds like we need to develop some serious mental defense mechanisms to navigate this world of constant persuasion.
Absolutely. It's about cultivating a critical mindset, a healthy skepticism, and a commitment to seeking out the truth.
Even when it's hidden beneath layers of manipulation and deceit.
Exactly. Well, all this talk about mind control and manipulation has definitely given me a lot to think about.
Me too. It's made me realize just how vulnerable we all are to these techniques.
Yeah, it's kind of scary, but it's also empowering because once we understand how these tactics work, we can start to protect ourselves.
So instead of being passive victims of manipulation, we can become active agents in safeguarding our own minds.
Exactly. Now, before we wrap things up, I have to ask about this whole dragon thing.
Oh yeah, the dragon incident.
You're referring to the time when Joy Behar accused me of believing in dragons.
Precisely. It was on The View, and she was trying to make you look foolish. Like you were out of touch with reality.
The irony is that she said this right after saying that The View was a reliable source of information.
Like they're the arbiters of truth.
Right. And anyone who disagrees with them is delusional.
It was a pretty blatant attempt to discredit you and your views.
And it backfired pretty spectacularly.
It did. People saw right through it.
It just goes to show that even the most clumsy attempts at manipulation can be exposed when they're based on falsehoods.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it highlights the importance of staying true to ourselves and our values, even when we're being attacked.
The truth has a way of coming out.
It does. Well, I think it's time to take a break and let our listeners process all this information about mind control and manipulation. It's a lot to digest.
Agreed. But when we come back, we'll explore how understanding these techniques can actually empower us to navigate the world more effectively and protect ourselves from undue influence. All right, welcome back. I hope everyone's ready for more because we're about to get into some really interesting stuff about hypnosis and persuasion.
Yeah, this is where it gets really practical.
Exactly, because remember, we're not trying to make anyone paranoid or anything.
Right. It's all about empowering you with knowledge.
Yeah, once you see how these techniques work, you're less likely to be manipulated by them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's about taking control of your own mind.
Mm-hmm.
Choosing what you believe and how you react.
And this next part might be especially interesting for you since you're so into personal development and self-improvement.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Well, Hughes actually lays out his formula for hypnosis.
Really?
Yeah, and he says it can be applied to all sorts of things, like sales therapy, even personal growth.
Wow, so it's not just about swinging a pocket watch and making someone cluck like a chicken.
Nope. It's actually much more subtle than that. He says it all boils down to two main things: enhanced focus and a series of micro-compliances.
Micro-compliances, what are those?
It's like getting someone to agree to a bunch of small things first.
So they're more likely to say yes to bigger things later.
Exactly. It's like building momentum.
I see.
And remember how we were talking about social media? Well, Hughes suggests that these platforms use similar tactics to influence user behavior.
Oh, yeah, like those constant notifications.
Exactly. All those likes and comments. It's like a never-ending stream of micro-compliances that keeps us hooked.
And makes us more open to the platform's suggestions.
Right. It's like they're training us to crave validation.
And in the process, we give up more and more of our control.
That's the scary part. It's like we're all playing this game, but we don't even know the rules.
And the algorithms are designed to keep us playing.
Exactly. So what can we do about it?
Well, Hughes says the first step is awareness. Understanding how these platforms are designed and what their goals are.
So it's not about quitting social media altogether.
Right. It's about using it more consciously.
Choosing how and when to engage.
And being mindful of the potential impact on our minds.
I like that. It's about taking back control.
Yeah, becoming more intentional with our technology use.
Well, this whole deep dive has really made me think, I'm starting to see these patterns of manipulation everywhere now.
It's like you've got a new set of glasses on.
Exactly. And I can't unsee it now. It's kind of unsettling.
But also kind of exciting, right? Like you're seeing the world in a new way.
That's true. It's like waking up from a dream.
And realizing that there's a whole lot more going on than we realize.
Exactly. But now that we're awake, we can start to make different choices.
We can choose to challenge the narratives.
And reclaim our mental autonomy.
It's about taking back control of our own minds.
So is it even possible to achieve true freedom of thought?
That's a great question. And I don't know if there's a simple answer.
It's like a constant battle, right?
Yeah. But I think the first step is awareness. The more we understand the forces that are shaping our thoughts, the better equipped we'll be to resist those influences.
So it's about being vigilant.
Exactly. And never taking anything for granted.
Well, this has been an incredible dope dive.
I agree. Definitely some food for thought.
We've covered a lot of ground today.
Yeah.
Everything from mind control to cults to social media manipulation.
And hypnosis.
We hope this has given you a better understanding of how these techniques work and how to protect yourself from undue influence.
Remember, knowledge is power.
And the more you know, the more free you are to think for yourself.
Thanks for joining us.